Let us pray. O Lord, we give thanks for the bounty of our province, our land, our resources, and our people. We pledge ourselves to act as good stewards on behalf of all Albertans. Amen.
Introduction of visitors.
Mr. Speaker, today marks the first day of the Multiple Sclerosis Carnation Campaign to raise funds to combat this disease. As part of the kickoff ceremony today, it was a real pleasure for me to meet Linda Cohen, who has been named the Multiple Sclerosis Person of the Year. And I had a chance to congratulate her personally for her remarkable achievement, that of a 3,000-kilometer journey throughout Alberta in her own wheelchair marathon for multiple sclerosis. I have an added pleasure today, Mr. Speaker, in that I may introduce Linda to you and through you to members of the Assembly. She's in your gallery and is accompanied by Tammy Gartner. I ask that the House join me in welcoming them.
Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill 271, Disabled Parking Act. This bill would require the owners and operators of parking lots with more than 25 stalls to set aside at least 2% of the stalls in their lots for designated parking spaces for disabled persons. As well, employers who provide parking facilities for their employees would have to provide stalls for their disabled employees. Persons other than disabled persons parking in such designated stalls would be liable to fines between $50 and $200 and would have demerit points placed against their driving records.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton-Calder has moved first reading of Bill number 271, Disabled Parking Act. All those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Opposed, please say no. Motion carries.
Bill 271, being Disabled Parking Act, introduced by Honourable Member Ms. Melsness, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure today to table a two-part report entitled Recycling the Waste in the Province of Alberta, as written by the Environment Council of Alberta.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure today to table the report of the Alberta Review Panel on the Canada-Alberta Crop Insurance Program.
Introduction of special guests.
Minister of the Environment.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure today to introduce to you and welcome to the Legislative Assembly 5 distinguished gentlemen who've spent a great deal of time in the last several years putting together the report that I tabled just a few seconds ago. These gentlemen are members of the Environment Council of Alberta, panel committee that wrote the report entitled Recycling the Waste in the Province of Alberta. These distinguished gentlemen are in your gallery, Mr. Speaker, and I would now like to introduce them. Mr. Merrill Morstead, Chairman, Mr. Alistair Crear, Vice Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of the Environment Council of Alberta, Mr. David Chan, Mr. Robert Jones, and Mr. Gordon Osgood. I would welcome the response of the Assembly.
St. Albert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's indeed a pleasure for me today to introduce to you and through you to members of the Assembly 55 grade 6 students from Robert Rundle School located in the constituency of St. Albert. It's a double pleasure for me today to introduce them because both my son and daughter attended that school for all the time that they went there, and I'm sure that many of the students know both my daughter Jill and my son Dean. They are accompanied today, Mr. Speaker, by 2 teachers, Mr. Tony Swarry and Mrs. Joan Pomfrey. They're seated in the public Members Gallery, and I'd ask that they rise and receive the traditional warm welcome of the Assembly.
Social Services Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it's indeed a privilege for me today to be able to introduce a class of 30 students, grade 7, from Prairie Junior High School in the Three Hills constituency. There are 2 teachers with them today, Mr. Jake Petka, Mr. John Tromsness, along with other helpers, Mrs. Petka, Mrs. Bender, Gerald Petka, and Jean Gurley. Mr. Speaker, I had the opportunity to spend a few moments with the class, got their perceptions of our provincial museum, and as I also understand this afternoon, they will be visiting a well-known attraction in Edmonton where I understand Canada's Navy is housed. Would they like to rise and receive the warm welcome of the House? I believe they're both in the public and members gallery.
Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, as part of our good neighbor policy, I would like to introduce a visitor from the state of Montana. And he is Greg Grepper, head of assessment for the state of Montana, and he is in the members gallery along with Rennie Gagne from the Department of Municipal Affairs, and I would ask both to stand.
Mr. Speaker, today I am pleased to be able to introduce to you and through you to members of the Assembly 52 grade 6 students from Rimbey Elementary School located in the fine town of Rimbey. They are accompanied by teachers Mr. Moore and Mr. Stimo, and parents Mrs. Godlinton, Mrs. Varty, Mrs. Harima, Mrs. Hills, Mrs. Jennings, and Mrs. Paulson. Mr. Speaker, they are seated in the members' gallery. I now ask that they stand and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Mrs. Cooper, Francis.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct my questions to the Minister for Career Development and follow up from my colleagues' questions yesterday on his soon-to-be, we think, Work for Welfare project. My first question to the Minister, Mr. Speaker, is simply this. Will he advise now, while the Assembly's on, the total projected cost of this program, and what does he estimate, and why wasn't this in his department's estimates?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd be pleased to send the Honourable Leader a copy of Hansard complimentary from yesterday so that he can see the comments that I made during question period then. At that time, I did indicate that we have not finalized the levels of funding, and I do not care to reveal them at this particular time. I will do that at the appropriate moment.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. I thought this was the legislature, and we're in charge of the purse strings of the province. I guess it's a new brand of democracy here in Alberta. But my question to the Minister, if he won't even do this much, will he now confirm that he's chopped several job training programs and axed the PEP and STEP budgets to get money for this new scheme?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the opposition is going to get a sore back from flipping around on this issue. One day they say we don't do enough for social assistance recipients. The next day we're saying we're doing too much. I can assure the Honourable Leader and all my colleagues that we have a legitimate concern for these individuals who are categorized as employables and social assistance. We don't look at it as putting a price on their head or a dollar amount. We're interested in getting them into the labor force and making them productive, Mr. Speaker. It's not an issue of, in my view, it's not an issue of money. It's an issue of dealing with people who are disadvantaged, and we want to deal with it in the most appropriate way.
Mr. Speaker, that's very debatable, but the point that we're trying to find out is what they are attempting to do with this program. We're not getting the information from this government. My question to the minister, is this not just a cynical attempt to take people from social systems, assistance, put them on long enough so they can collect UIC and try to get from the federal government? Isn't that what this program's all about?
Well, I find the honourable leader's comments offensive, Mr. Speaker. This is a program that deals with a group of individuals who do not have a record of recent work experience and who have been unemployed for a protracted period of time. We will bring this program forward at the appropriate time when we have tied all the loose ends up, when we feel confident that it's a program that's going to be acceptable by the employables, when it's going to be acceptable by employers who, without their support of this program, it simply won't work, Mr. Speaker. They will get valuable on-the-job experience, and it will be in the private sector where the long-term jobs are available, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. We're trying to nail this down. Whether the minister finds this offensive or not, people in Alberta want to know. And my question is there any guarantee that these will be in fact long-term jobs, or are they there just long enough so that we can get them off welfare and on UIC and then they'll be back in welfare again? Will the minister answer that question specifically?
Mr. Speaker, there are no guarantees in life, and certainly there's no guarantees in this program. One thing I can guarantee the honourable member, Mr. Speaker, is that this program will deal with a legitimate concern for employables in the employable category and social assistance. We will be providing with them valuable on-the-job work experience. We'll be getting them back into the labour force, and we will be dealing with the disadvantaged nature that their state of mind is in right now in the category on social assistance. It comes from a legitimate concern, and I'm not going to be rushed into announcing a program to satisfy the opposition, Mr. Speaker. I will bring forward a program when I've reviewed it with my colleagues and we're satisfied it will address the need that is there today.
Supplementary information, Minister of Social Services, then Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, just to put the conversation and the questions and answers in context, I think it is well known that for some time those in social services have expressed great concern about the growing category of single employables, and particularly the young people that were coming onto the caseload. Mr. Speaker, this is a phenomena that we see right across the country, and assuredly I am most grateful to my colleague for working diligently at bringing forward a program to address this pressing need.
Member for Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, a supplementary to the minister. I'm most afraid that with 3/4 of the salary being paid, it sounds like a gigantic boondoggle to get very cheap labor to some selected employees, selected employers, I should say. Now, who is going to decide who will get these cheap employees? Who is going to decide which employers are going to get the cheap employees?
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is deja vu. I got the same question from the leader of the Liberal Party yesterday, and I believe that I answered it yesterday. As this program unfolds, Mr. Speaker, it will become very clear that one of the most difficult issues dealing with pulling this program together is dealing in an appropriate way with the frontline social service workers so that they can identify the employables category and refer them to my department so that we can then get them into meaningful work experience programs. The decisions will be made in concert with the Department of Social Services and the counselors in career development and employment, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Supplementary Little Bow, followed by Red Deer South.
Speaker, supplementary question to the Minister of Social Services that would initiate the transfer of persons into this proposed program. Could the Minister indicate whether in the proposals you're looking at voluntary transition from the unemployed employable category to useful work, or will there be some nudge mechanism implemented in the program that will move people into this other work program that's being proposed?
Mr. Speaker, the program will certainly be voluntary, and I don't believe nudge will be required because the highest percentage of the people that I speak to who are single unemployables very much would like some type of work experience if they're not able to obtain the traditional employment at this point in time.
Red Deer South supplementary.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Career Development. Could the Minister please indicate to this Assembly how many single employables that he hopes to be able to take off the welfare rolls and put back into society in a meaningful way and assist with meaningful employment?
Well, Mr. Speaker, in our calculations, along with my honourable colleague, the Minister of Social Services, we've determined that the level of employables and social assistance has grown by some 20% in the last year, and that's in the area of 28,000 to 30,000 individuals. In my view, any percentage of that group that we move from social assistance into the labour force, and I would like to underline the comment that the leader of the representative party pointed out, that is that this program is voluntary, that I will be dealing, as a department, we will be dealing with the individuals who have an inclination to work. And I can assure you, Mr. Speaker, and assure this House that if the number is small or if the number is large, it will be a worthwhile program because we will not only have dealt with the fiscal matter, but we will have dealt with a matter that is very important to the people collecting social assistance, and that is that they are a productive part of society.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to designate my second question, the member from Edmonton Highlands.
Mr. Speaker, I too would like to ask a question of the Minister of Career Development and Employment. He's just pointed out that his new program, which he won't elaborate on in this Assembly, is going to be voluntary. I might note that the Minister of Social Services has ensured that they'll be so poor that they'll have no choice but to participate in this kind of program. Mr. Speaker, the Minister's estimates were debated in this Assembly just a few weeks ago, and the Minister is avoiding the essence of the issue today. He chopped one industrial training program by $21 million. Will he now present the evidence to this Assembly and to Albertans which will demonstrate categorically that he isn't taking from Peter to pay Paul?
Well, no, Mr. Speaker, because Peter is no longer interested in training programs and Paul's interested in employment programs. That's why we've moved money from training into job creation. That's the essence of the labour market strategy, and it's the essence of my estimates. The demand is down, Mr. Speaker, in the area of training. The demand is up in the area of job creation and recent work experience. It seems to make sense to me to move funds from the training area into the job creation area. That's what we've done because we're sensitive to the demand. I don't know what's wrong with the opposition, Mr. Speaker, why they would not support a program that is so important to these individuals. And along with that, I do not understand why they find work offensive. They seem to think that there's something offensive about working. I don't believe that, Mr. Speaker, and I know that the employables and social assistants don't find it offensive either.
Considering the Minister just put a question, perhaps I'll answer it. What's offensive is that we haven't got the details and the Minister won't defend them in the Assembly. Now, the Minister has said, Mr. Speaker, the Minister has said that he wants to transfer the funds into job creation. That's a laudable goal. Will the Minister now explain why it is that he won't make those funds available to non-profit ventures that are extremely important, like helping fix the infrastructure in most municipalities in this province?
And Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member knows, we have a number of programs that deal with non-profit organizations. We have the Priority Employment Program that is a winter employment program. We have the Summer Temporary Employment Program, which is a summer job creation program. The organizations that the member is talking about can access these programs, and government departments and non-profit organizations do. As a matter of fact, the take-up is very significant. This is a program, the Employment Alternatives Program, is a program targeted at a specific problem that we've identified. It does not mean to say that all of the other programs are going to sleep in the department, Mr. Speaker. They're ongoing. The take-up is very good in those departments, in those programs, and it's making some significant inroads in dealing with the issues that we have to deal with the unemployed. So there are programs that, the food banks, as the member brought up yesterday, or municipalities, nonprofit organizations can access a number of existing programs within the department, Mr. Speaker.
Well, supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. I take it then, or will the minister confirm that in fact his department is prepared to go along with a co-sponsored program between the federal government, the provincial government and cities in order to fix the infrastructural problems that exist under this very ground? Is he prepared to do that?
Well, I didn't know there was a problem with the infrastructure under this ground, Mr. Speaker, but I can tell you that as far as the Employment Alternatives Program goes, that it will be a cooperative venture between the federal government because they too have recognized, Department of Health and Welfare have recognized the need for a program that will make employables and social assistants productive members of the workforce. It's a variation of all of the other programs we have in the department, and I, for the life of me, Mr. Speaker, don't know why it startles the opposition so.
Final supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. I assure you, the members, that I think the minister was more startled yesterday than anybody when the question first arose. My final supplementary question, though, is will the minister now commit himself to enhancing similar programs within his department, particularly programs like STEP, so that we're not, in fact, forcing the people who don't come with a 75% subsidy attached to their labor into direct competition against those who do, so that we can actually solve the unemployment problem? Would he do that?
Mr. Speaker, I can assure the honourable member that the matter is under consideration at this very moment.
To supplementary, Vermilion Viking.
Yes, to the minister, could you tell us if this program of work for welfare would be actuarially sound in this context, that the funds that the taxpayers are paying for social assistance now would be used only as an incentive to create a meaningful job for these individuals?
Mr. Speaker, one of the reasons that this program is targeted at the private sector and not at the public sector and at nonprofit organizations is because we cannot be guaranteed, nor can nonprofit organizations or other like organizations guarantee long-term meaningful employment. Traditionally, nonprofit organizations and public organizations have offered short-term job creation. And Mr. Speaker, we believe that the route to go is in the private sector because that's where the money is best spent from our point of view, because it provides the longer-term opportunity. And in fact, the experience that individuals be getting on the job will certainly bode well for them in the future in their working life.
Edmonton Gold Bar, supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is all very mysterious, you know. We don't know who's going to do it or what on earth it's going to cost. You just took my breath away, Mr. Speaker. To the minister, will the workers in this program end up getting more or less income support than they're getting on social assistance, now below the poverty line?
Mr. Speaker, the program, as I've indicated, and has been well documented in this legislature and in the media, will more than likely unfold June 1st. And I would just ask that the opposition just hold on to their chairs for that particular moment, and all of the details will be made available in and around that date.
Member for Westlock Sturgeon, main question, followed by the member for Little Bow.
Mr. Speaker, my main question today is to the Premier. Yesterday, in response to the member from Gold Bar, Edmonton Gold Bar, question on last week's agreement with the federal spending power, the Premier referred to tyranny of the majority. Now, I would remind the Premier that it was this government, or his government, which allowed extra billing on hospital user fees, while the so-called tyranny of the majority banned these practices in order to protect the principles of Medicare. Now, to the Premier, Mr. Speaker, would the Premier indicate to the House whether he considers present proposals for such as daycare to be tyrannical programs which are for opting out?
I'm afraid, Mr. Speaker, that the honourable member for Westlock Sturgeon misses the point completely. The point is that the federal government has had an opportunity over past years until the Alberta government and other governments have been able to stop it most recently, to be able to move, despite our Constitution, into areas that are totally within the jurisdiction of the provinces. And using their taxing power, have been able to make an end run around the Constitution, create the demand, put a program in place, penalize provinces who don't completely go along with their views, and then at times even pull out and leave the provinces carrying the dollars for the program. That is over.
Mr. Speaker, I think you should be well aware that Medicare would not be in, or either would old age pensions, if there hadn't been a national government trying to get the provinces in line on it. Well, would the Premier then elaborate then on, he mentioned that he had an understanding on compatible provincial programs. Could he elaborate a little more as to what he is considering as compatible provincial programs?
I find, Mr. Speaker, the whole tenor of that question completely offensive. Here is somebody who's elected by the people of Alberta to represent them, and he is prepared to throw that away to someone in Ottawa who will dictate to him how to be brought into line. That's the kind of thinking that has led to the mess in Ottawa from the previous Liberal government supported by the NDP.
I think, Mr. Speaker, if anybody should be offended in Alberta, it's those that have to pay extra care, those that have to dig in their pockets to support some of the right-wing philosophy that is exhibited on the other side of the fence here. Could the Premier then elaborate a little further then? There was another thing else he mentioned, that if the provinces are going to go on their own, Mr. Speaker, they would get reasonable compensation. What does he consider reasonable compensation? After all, don't forget we sold the elected Senate down the drain for this reasonable compensation.
Mr. Speaker, speaking of reasonable compensation, Mr. Speaker, there'd be a great deal more have to come back from central Canada to the province of Alberta, since supported by the Liberals and the Socialist NDP, they managed to rip off some $50 to $60 billion from this province. We'd like to get reasonable compensation for that. But, Mr. Speaker, I would expect that any member would have to make a judgment on his own that when a program is going to be put in place in Canada, if a province wants to control that program themselves outside of the federal program, that there would be some type of agreement worked out as to what reasonable compensation would be, then the monies would flow in a block form to the province, and they'd be able to administer the program within their needs and the circumstances within their province.
Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, the Provincial Liberal Party didn't get a chance to drink champagne there with you. I hope he works harder to define these difficult terms than the way he worked to define Aboriginal rights. But to the Premier, would you then pledge that you will not enter into any agreement that is as ill-defined as those previous concepts that we just mentioned of back up here a bit on reasonable compensation,
compatible programs,
and compatible provincial programs and reasonable compensation. Will you agree that you will not sign an agreement that says those very words?
Mr. Speaker, what I may do is have to provide more research dollars so that the Honourable Leader will get the questions right.
Yeah. Member for Little Bow, for a supplementary question on the issue. Member for Edmonton Norwood.
To follow up with the Premier and try to nail this down a little more, reasonable compensation, but it has to be compatible, as I understand it, with a national program. Could the Premier indicate specifically, I expect the next major one talked about would be the daycare system, how that would work, that Alberta would get their compensation if they didn't want to opt in? What's the Premier's understanding of that?
Well, Mr. Speaker, there isn't a proposal for a national daycare program, so it's pretty difficult to deal with a hypothetical matter.
Little Bow, followed by the member for Innisfail.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Premier, and it's about the Meech Lake Conference as well. I'd like the Premier to comment with regards to the interpretation of Section 1B of the Meach Agreement, which I could quote, Mr. Speaker. 1B says, the recognition that Quebec constitutes within Canada a distinct society. What if the Premier could indicate what that specifically means and possibly relate that to the comment in the legislature yesterday of the Premier indicating that all provinces are equal?
Difficulty framing the response, Honourable Premier, because of a legal interpretation, but please carry on with some care to that.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Leader of the Representative Party and maybe other members are familiar with what he is referring to is part of the communique yesterday, and he was referring to Part B of Section 1. Section 1, which is made up of A and B, defines the way Canada is today. That's what it does. There's no threat in there. It is a description of the way Canada is today.
Supplementary question. The Gilles Rimillard, the Quebec Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs, has made a comment indicating that Quebec is entitled to special powers not available to other powers. And he is saying that to the people of Quebec. Could the Premier indicate what type of special powers, or is this just posturing by the Quebec minister in his own province?
Mr. Speaker, during our question period, I can hardly be responsible for another minister of another government in another province.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to this question. And could the Premier indicate in his mind and in his interpretation as the leader of the government of Alberta whether there are any special differences that have been accorded Quebec in terms of that agreement?
Mr. Speaker, the part that we were looking at is the Section 1 describes Canada as it is today and then says that we have a responsibility to keep Canada as it is today in relation to the fine country that we believe we have. I think that's a reasonable position to take, certainly one that I support.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the Premier. In the remarks of the Minister from Quebec, he indicates that on the basis of maintaining Quebec as a distinct society and maintaining its distinct character, that other sections of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms could be challenged. Would the Premier indicate whether that is a matter being investigated by his research people and is a matter of concern of the government after examining the decision and the agreements that were made at Meech Lake?
Mr. Speaker, the section that we are discussing right now in no way establishes any special provinces. And that was one of the principles in which Alberta went to the conference, that there was equal provinces within Canada. To be able to describe Canada as it has in this part of the communique, I think is reasonable, and then goes on to say that Parliament and the provincial legislatures, in the exercise of their respective powers, are committed to preserving the fundamental characteristic of Canada referred to in paragraph 1A. I think that's reasonable. It is no special status involved there.
Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Premier's with regard to the accord that or agreement that he signed, our interpretation widely held is that an elected Triple-E elected Senate will have to be approved by every province in Canada if it indeed gets that far. Is there any possibility, could the Premier tell if there's any possibility of getting the Triple-E Senate considered the same way an amendment to the Constitution would be of 7 out of 10 provinces with 50% of the population, which would make it much easier to achieve?
Mr. Speaker, there's been a certain amount of discussion on this issue. Members would have to remember that the federal government had a veto over Senate reform previously, and as a matter of fact had absolutely no obligation to in any way discuss it. What we've been able to do for the first time in 120 years is to get Senate reform entrenched in the Constitution. It would have been totally unrealistic for any government to say that we could in somehow jam Senate reform down the throats of a large part of our nation. I think that is exactly the wrong way to build a strong country. Some kind of a jiggering around with percentages or half of the population is exactly the wrong way to build this nation. We believe if we have such a strong position as the Triple-E Senate, that it stands on its feet and that we can sell the people of Canada, the leaders in Canada, that this is an important change and a needed change in our country, to have a stronger country for the future. I think it can be done. My belief, after talking with the other First Ministers, is that we're already over the hump of an effective Senate. I think we are very close to being in agreement that there should be an elected Senate. The debate then becomes whether we have an equal or equitable, I think, would then become the debate. I think we've already established, first of all, that we are equal, all provinces are equal, based on this accord. That's established. We've put in place the First Ministers' Conference in the Constitution, where we are equal, sitting around the table. We are establishing the position. I think it is then to carry that position into the Senate reform, where we're elected, effective, and equal. That will be the job for all members of this Assembly, the job for Albertans and many other Canadians that we'll be working at in the coming years. And I would hate to see members of this Assembly start to say that it's impossible, because that's the perfect way to make sure it doesn't happen, is to start to take that kind of a defeatist attitude.
Member for Innisfail, followed by Edmonton Avonmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Agriculture. Would the Minister please explain to the Assembly what recommendations that were made by the Hail and Crop Review Panel will be instituted in this crop year?
Mr. Speaker, a number of recommendations have been implemented for the 1987-88 crop year. Loss adjustments for separate crops will be adjusted separately in 1987-88 crop year, thus ensuring that a crop loss in one crop will not affect other crops that the farmer also has. The interest has been set back from September the 1st to October the 1st to give farmers a chance to take the crop off. The differential between stubble and fallow has been reassessed and will continue to be reassessed. The corporation is going to attempt to ensure that abuse does not occur, because that was one of the major concerns raised at the hearings. Beekeepers are allowed to participate at a lower level of the number of hives of bees that they own. There's a commitment to improve the promptness of adjustment, and we've added in lentils, field peas, and faba beans for the 1987-88 crop year. Other adjustments, which are minimal, have also been made and will continue to be made during this crop year.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Would the Minister also explain to the Assembly what recommendations are being negotiated with the federal government?
Mr. Speaker, all negotiations with the federal government are very preliminary at this point in time, because the recommendations that I take forward would have to be approved first by caucus and cabinet, because they certainly would incur some major budget commitments by the government. Individual coverage is one of the areas that we are talking on a current basis, as it's already an acceptable process in other provinces. The other areas that we want to look at are, as I indicated the other day in answer to a question, the Prairie Grain Revenue Insurance Program and the Disaster Insurance Program. I might add, Mr. Speaker, though, that we have had talks with the federal government on the Disaster Insurance Program, and they consider crop insurance to be disaster insurance. We have some concern about that because it certainly doesn't meet the needs of all the variances we have in this province in agriculture.
Additional supplementary, Westlock Sturgeon.
Just Associate Minister of Agriculture, Mr. Speaker, could the Minister inform the House whether or not it's possible to achieve the target of 60 to 65% of the farmers signed up for crop insurance, which would be a tremendous leap over the only about 50% other years?
Mr. Speaker, I think the member from Sturgeon has his figures incorrect. Right now, last year, 1986-87, there were 24,000 producers in this province insured under the crop insurance program for over 11 million acres of crop. If my memory serves me correct, Mr. Speaker, the actual acres of crop insured is in the range of about 70%, and 65% of the farmers who make their living primarily or have for a major portion of their income on grain and their crop. Grain is a major component of the farming operation, are actually insured.
Begerville.
The Minister, Mr. Speaker, in terms of coverage for people who loss of yield due to pesticide spraying, has the Minister recommended any changes to the program this year so that we can avoid a situation where last year the Minister was recommending to producers that they hide the fact that the yield loss was due to pesticide spraying in order to receive fair coverage?
Mr. Speaker, I think the member is in error. In talking to honey producers from southern Alberta, there were a number of reasons for lower honey yields, and the only advice I gave to the honey producers was to ensure that in fact they looked at all areas of loss in their honey production. I might say that I also encourage the Beekeepers Association to work far more closely with the farmers on whose farms they have their bees to try to minimize the risk involved in spraying in their operations.
Member for Edmonton-Avonmore, followed by Edmonton-Meadowlark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Minister of Community and Occupational Health spoke about a pilot study being recommended to the Edmonton public and the Calgary separate school boards, which would provide, and I quote, suicide information, awareness, and prevention material. To the Minister of Education, is this program separate from the proposed career and life management curriculum or the new grade 9 health curriculum, and will her department or any other department be providing funding for implementation of these programs in every school in the province?
Mr. Speaker, I think that anything that we as a province can do to address the very serious nature of teenage suicides in our province is an important initiative. Within the curriculum development of the Health and Personal Life Skills program for grades 7 to 9, the matter of suicide prevention is being addressed in the whole development of that program, and really follows upon a resolution which was passed in this Assembly last summer, brought forward by the member from Old Didsbury. I don't think that curriculum development precludes other important initiatives taking place throughout the community, and I applaud the Minister of Community and Occupational Health for continuing to address a difficult situation.
Mr. Speaker, suicide prevention requires much more than the stated printed material. What direct funding will be forthcoming to school boards so that teachers may receive training to detect suicidal ideation and impulses and to be sensitive and to develop strategies to intervene effectively?
Mr. Speaker, we do not initiate or bring into place into schools curriculum without ensuring that there is appropriate training of teachers, or in-servicing as the term is implied. Certainly that has taken place in the past and will continue to take place in the future.
Mr. Speaker, the minister has cut funding in the areas of counseling and teacher in-service training, areas most necessary for the implementation of any meaningful strategy for reducing adolescent suicide or any introduction of new curriculum. Will the minister be allocating any new funds so that school boards can provide adequate counseling services for troubled and suicidal children?
Mr. Speaker, the changes that are effected in curriculum in the schools for September of 1987 will include the implementation of the Health and Personal Life Skills curriculum, which is the health curriculum for grades 7 to 9. As I've indicated, there will be appropriate training of teachers, and certainly the in-servicing of teachers is not solely attributable to the province's resources, because there are initiatives that are taking place with the school boards. But as I have said, and as is the bottom line with respect to the question, appropriate in-servicing of teachers will take place within the curriculum.
Mr. Speaker, many child suicides are caused by a history of disrupted foster home placement and reapprehensions, or to abuse in their families of origin, and thus fall under the jurisdiction of the Director of Child Welfare. To the Minister of Social Services, what changes in the provision of care to children under the Child Welfare Act is she willing to make to address this issue, other than closing treatment centres like Maple Ridge?
Mr. Speaker, I believe that I went into some detail to discuss that very sensitive subject in the estimates of the Department of Social Services, and certainly there are far more outreach programs now that deal with children directly in relationship to their family, as opposed to taking them away from the family and putting them in institutional care.
Edmonton Meadowlark, supplementary or main question? Main question, followed by the member for Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the often stated priorities of this government is to diversify Alberta's economic base. At the same time, when we look at this budget, it's very difficult to find that priority emphasized in this government's financial initiatives. To the Premier, could the Premier please explain how his government expects to effectively diversify this economy when only 1% of the government's entire budget has anything to do with initiatives that can be construed as economic diversification initiatives?
Mr. Speaker, the government's commitment to diversification is very deep, and we will do it in every way we possibly can. Some ways it will be done by investments which would not be carried in the budget, such as an investment that we have in the pulp mill at Whitecourt. It could be in investment in other opportunities. There's no question that in the competition for diversification, all provinces are competing. It is, in fact, a real fist fight for diversification. We are committed to getting our share or greater of diversification, and we're going to do it.
Could the Premier please indicate what sort of commitment, therefore, he demonstrated in his pursuit of the CF-18 contract, which should have been the West's fair share, at least, of economic diversification initiatives, and which instead went to Quebec when clearly they should have gone to Manitoba and we would have had spin-off benefits?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Minister of Economic Development and Trade has dealt with that many times in the legislature. If the member for Edmonton Meadowlark would like him to repeat his answer, I'm sure he'd be pleased to, but it's been dealt with.
To the Minister of Economic Development and Trade, speaking of priorities, even internally in a department, could the Minister please indicate how it is that his department has cut every single program delivery division, but has increased most of his administrative program divisions? And how is it that fully one-third of the staff in his department is related to or involved in administrative activities rather than program delivery activities? Is this department becoming too top-heavy in administration?
Mr. Speaker, I believe the Department of Economic Development is an effective department. It is not a large manpower department, fewer than 300 individuals involved. One of the reasons, and there are a variety of reasons for reductions in specific programs, one of them was with respect to reduction in the hourly individuals, which caused a reduction throughout a number of program areas. And this was as a result, Mr. Speaker, of some programs that have been just outstanding programs. The Small Business Equity Corporation program providing equity funds for small business to encourage economic investment and growth in our province. That program, the requirement for manpower has declined, as well as the Small Business Term Assistance Program. The program has been implemented, launched, and there is a reduced requirement for manpower. There are a variety of activities that are represented in the budget and in the estimates of the department. There have been some reductions, Mr. Speaker, as a result of one-time capital contributions to various projects that were in last year's budget that are not included in this year's budget. As well, there is some changes in terms of the votes, Mr. Speaker, where we've established the Office of the Commissioner for Trade and Tourism, which impacts on the vote for international trade by shifting some of the responsibility to another vote. As well, we have established a new Vote 6, which provides an opportunity for economic diversification initiatives, that many of which had previously been developed by way of special warrants. So there are a variety of initiatives contained in the budget. And had the honourable member listened to my comments yesterday, he might be more familiar with them, as well as had he referred to the document that I filed yesterday, he would also have a better knowledge.
12% increase in the minister's department, increases in both count them, not one, but two deputy ministers' divisions, 100, almost 100 of less.
Order, honourable member. Let us have the supplementary question, please, and this is not estimates.
All this emphasis on administration, can the minister please inform the House how it is that he justifies that emphasis against, for example, a 53% cut in export assistance to small business and industry in this province? Isn't that not achieving the kind of priorities in economic diversification and economic development that this government should be achieving and pursuing at times like this?
Mr. Speaker, I don't know whether the honourable member does this intentionally or whether he just unknowingly misrepresents what's happening in our budget. The initiatives to expand trade, I described a change in initiative. One particular program, which was a 3-year program that had a cap on the dollars, is winding down. And on 2 occasions in this Assembly, the honourable member has referred to a program that is a sunset period in it. Now, after the program terminates sometime this year, we'll review the success of the program. Incidentally, that program has allowed some 40 companies to develop bids on export contracts that has thus far resulted in $50 million worth of business for Alberta companies, a very successful program. But it was designed to sunset at the end of 3 years. We will review it, and should it be determined by the government that the program needs to be reinstituted or expanded, it will be done. There are a number of other areas, and I would again refer the honourable member to the initiatives that have been taken and outlined in the document that was tabled yesterday, and to enhance his knowledge of what has been happening in Alberta instead of constantly being a boo bird.
The honourable member, order. Time for question period has expired. Might we have unanimous consent to complete this series of questions? Opposed? Any other supplementaries? Member for Athabasca-Lac-La-Biche.
What continued or expanded role does the Minister foresee for Regional Economic Development Council in Alberta in view of the fact that many of them were very successful in harnessing, promoting economic diversification in rural Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, a very important element of our diversification initiatives has been to continue our very aggressive support to communities outside the major centers. And this is achieved in a variety of ways through our regional offices, through consultative services that are available to businesses throughout Alberta. The Regional Economic Development Project, which the Honourable Member had referred to in earlier question period, only provides support to 8 communities in this entire province. In addition to those 8 projects, the small business and industrial economic sectors of our department work very closely with all communities in the province who request our assistance and with business and industry, and will continue to do so.
Member for Cypress-Redcliffe.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister. Does the Minister in his review expect to find any more assistance to those many, many towns, with the exception of the 8, that would like economic expansion, economic development in their area?
Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly are aware that we recently announced a new initiative that is a very important initiative for Alberta, the Business Incubator Support Program, which is accessible to all parts of Alberta and is now available in terms of communities accessing that program. And we'll continue to provide support to all parts of Alberta through our consultative services in our offices throughout Alberta.
Orders of the day.